Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here today. I hope you're all doing absolutely excellent. Today, we're sitting down to talk about the latest piece from Jason Schreier of Bloomberg. He sat down with director Carrie Patel to talk about the experience in making Avowed. And the headline is really what grabbed my attention. It says, new Xbox game Avowed took 6 years and 2 reboots. So I've always been curious on the inside story about Avowed. I say that because number one, Obsidian's already been pretty transparent about the making of it. They said in their own documentary that they walked away from making Avowed a multiplayer game because it wasn't them. It didn't fit their studio identity, which makes sense. But then you look at something like Grounded, which is very much against everything Obsidian was built to make, and that game is fantastic. And it's also multiplayer. So this gets a little bit into the thick of the making of this game. What was actually going on? What was the original vision? And also, is the game succeeding in sales? According to Obsidian, we have no numbers, but are they happy with those sales? And what's next for Carrie Patel and her team with Avowed? We get some answers here that I thought were really interesting to discuss. So let's get into it. If you're new here, ladies and gentlemen, consider subscribing. Let's start off at the top, Broken Vows. About 4 years ago, employees of the Irvine, California-based video game developer Obsidian Entertainment were set to gather on a video call to discuss some unpleasant news. Avowed, the ambitious role-playing game that they had been developing for more than 2 years, was going to be rebooted. Carrie Patel, who would take over as director on the new version, already had a lot of reasons to be anxious as she awaited for the all-hands meeting to start. During her time at Obsidian, her first video game company, she had been a writer, a lead narrative designer, and the director of an expansion. But she had never led development on a game this large, and she knew that the news would result in upheaval and a big hit to the team's morale. Now, the question you may be asking is, what was version 1 that was being delayed? Because a lot of us saw that initial Avowed trailer, and it was something completely different from what we'd eventually get with the gameplay trailer. Now, I'll completely say that I was sold on the reveal trailer, but when I got the gameplay trailer, I was like, the tone here is different, but I was very still into what we got with that gameplay trailer. So what was going on in those years? Well, here's the explanation. Development of Avowed began in 2018 as Obsidian executives were gearing up to sell the company after 15 years of independence. The studio had become beloved for complex role-playing games like Fallout New Vegas and Pillars of Eternity, but staying solvent was always a challenge. Obsidian presented prospective buyers with a pitch for Avowed, which would be the company's magnum opus, a cross between Destiny and Skyrim that allowed players to adventure together in a massive fantasy world. Later that year, Microsoft purchased Obsidian. The new owners announced the game in the summer of 2020. But despite a glossy teaser trailer, Avowed was floundering. The development team had gone through 2 different vertical slices, chunks of the game designed to demonstrate how it all functioned, and cut the multiplayer component. Even so, it was still failing to coalesce. By January, the studio had decided to replace the project's leadership team and reboot the game. This came as a shock to the Avowed team, which consisted of 80 people who were preparing to enter production. Now they would have to develop a third vertical slice and essentially start over from scratch. So a lot of people said that this was always going to be Obsidian Skyrim, and then it changed into something else, but Skyrim crossed with Destiny is a new layer to that story. Honestly, in a lot of ways, this sounds very cool on paper. I still wish there was a level of like Obsidian trying to challenge Skyrim, but as we've seen in many comparison videos online, like Skyrim's world, Oblivion's world are far more interactive, dynamic, and reactive than what is on display here in Avowed. Likely because, as I said in my review, that, you know, there was this whole multiplayer component which involves stapling a lot of things down. You don't build like a physics system for objects in the game if you're planning to make a multiplayer game where disrupting the environment could disrupt the content itself, right? So it goes back to all of that, which is why I think some design decisions in Avowed feel very out of place even compared to prior Obsidian games. When you know, oh, there was 2 vertical slices and like the third one that they developed upon is what we got, it makes a lot more sense with what you're seeing. And it goes back to the other thing I said in my review, which is compared to all the other RPG reclamation projects we've seen, it's why Avowed finds itself in a fine category for me. Like, it's fine enough. You know, I don't think it's as excellent as Obsidian's prior games, but it's all right enough. I don't review games based on like what their story is. It's just what's the game in front of me. But again, I think as time goes on, people might grow a little bit of fondness for Avowed in the same way they did with New Vegas. New Vegas was made in this really crunchy environment. It was made in a year and a half, and that does make the game, in hindsight, incredibly impressive. Avowed had 4 years after 2 vertical slices, and so I think some people over time will appreciate what Obsidian made with that time and the challenges they faced in development. In the weeks and months that followed, Patel had to simultaneously figure out a new vision for the game, refill key leadership positions, and ensure that dozens of writers, designers, programmers, and artists had work to do as Avowed found its footing. It was like building the tracks while the train is moving forward, Patel said. A lot of lessons we learned as we were building this game, ideally, we would have learned on a small scale with a true pre-production, she added. I want to pause here for just a moment because there's a lot to be said about this sort of development environment. We'll talk next about what's going on with walking away from the Skyrim vision. Why was that? But what you see here is kind of a level of figuring it out as you go along. I mean, building the tracks while the train is moving forward is a good way of putting it as well. But that sort of development environment, I mean, that's why I think you see questionable writing quality on, I think, a level that is not Obsidian proper. Let's take a companion, for example. If you are writing a character in a video game and you don't know the constraints that character has around them, like, can they react to things in our game? Can they leave our party in our game? Like, what are the parameters in the systems design for our game that'll affect the dialogue? What kind of choices can we make? What parts of the gameplay will they affect at all? If you don't have those decisions made while you're writing, that likely A, leads to a lot of rewriting, but B, it leads to a lot of safe writing because you want to make sure you make something that doesn't have to get adjusted because it's going to affect your timeline that's already dwindling. And when your game's been rebooted multiple times, you've just been bought by a new publisher, you're likely at risk of having this project close down any moment in time. So kudos to the team for being able to move it forward. But that's why I think things are the way they are in Avowed. For me, just having that sort of information helps me accept and understand what truly happened here at this product. But let's get to another key decision here, which is about walking away from that Skyrim-like design. They say under Patel, the game made 2 major pivots. One was to double down on the story and lore from the Pillars of Eternity franchise, which Obsidian had been incubating for more than a decade. The other was to replace the open world with open zones, like the company's 2019 hit, The Outer Worlds, which would allow the development team to create distinct, dense spaces. They'd have to sacrifice the ambitions of building a Skyrim-style map where players could walk for hours and still not see everything, but for technological and logistical reasons, that was proving to be an impossible quest. Simply put, they couldn't do it. Was this a good choice or not? Hindsight 2020, we can talk about that a little bit. I think that this was a good choice at the end of the day to walk away from the open world style. I don't think Avowed as a game gains anything as being truly seamless open worlds. And I say that because the zones themselves are very big and full of content. Like, there's so much to do where, again, you could spend upwards of 70 hours in Avowed. That was far more than I was anticipating going in. And I think for people who really dig what's there, that is excellent news for them. And that makes the exploration more enriched. One thing Avowed does do a little bit better than the Outer Worlds is, like, when you're roaming the zones in the Outer Worlds, it does feel very tight, very confined. And so each location has to matter significantly more, in my opinion. So when I'm roaming a planet and I find, a stack of crates and there's just enemies surrounding it, it's like some sort of shipment. It's just basically an area to fight enemies, get a little bit of loot. That falls short for me, whereas something like what Avowed does, where there's room to really stretch your legs, let the game breathe a bit more, is that I think the more meaningful environmental encounters were plentiful in this game because of that. So I don't know if Obsidian really ever needs to go truly open world with how big the zones were in this game. It felt like, again, good ways to break up what you're kind of seeing throughout the experience and marking a sense of progression, which very big games, like even a fantastic one like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, might struggle a bit with, because you're just constantly going in that same space over and over, which has its own pros and cons, of course. But to me, a lot of people have asked me that, like, would you want to see more open zones from Obsidian? Would have been better as an open world? I would say that, to me, it depends on your taste, of course. I am not in love with open world games like I once was in high school and early college. It's never like a detriment when I hear, like, oh God, I'm so upset about it. But I do like Obsidian's hub style design. That's always been my favorite since I was a kid, thanks to KOTOR, and then like in high school with Dishonored. Like, that sort of style of design, I think, leads to more meaningful exploration. That's what I look for in these games. And I feel like maybe there was a risk of Avowed coming up short even there if they didn't have hub style areas. Faced with the pressure of delivering one of Obsidian's biggest bets, Patel spent a lot of time getting to know the unfamiliar disciplines like engineering while making tough calls about what to prioritize. Avowed was re-revealed in 2023 and initially set for a fall 2024 release before it slipped to February 2025. It wasn't until late in development that it all coalesced. Just to kind of corroborate this part of the reporting, this was something I remember hearing a year ago leading into what we thought was going to be Avowed in the fall holiday window. It was like it was just starting to come together a bit, that before that it was a bit messy. So it's interesting to see that pop up here as well. But again, this is kudos to Obsidian for managing to figure it out. I don't think it'll matter to a ton of people out there because they just care about the game in front of them and whether it satisfies their needs or not. But still, good to see the recovery project went over as well as it could. Now, continuing on here, they say there's this interesting thing I've seen on every project I've worked on or seen during my time at the studio. Things are messy, messy, messy. Then they start coming together, Patel said. How can we find that point a little earlier? Or at least find the things we need to reinforce for ourselves. Yes, we will get there. We're on track. A lot of it is iterative. There's a lot of work to get there, but ultimately it was worth the wait. Players raved about the game, and the company said it is happy with the sales so far, which based on the Steam player count, I mean, people are sizing up this game differently. Like they're trying to compare it to, say, Avowed, which is a full AAA production. Meanwhile, we're seeing this was an 80-ish person team here on Obsidian that made a AA style game. So the budget is going to be far lower. Obviously, 6 years of development investment into this. Hopefully the good sales continue, because I imagine the recoup is far greater than your usual Obsidian project. Could be completely wrong about that. It's just my assumption based on what's here. But one thing we're about to get into is Carrie Patel as a director down the line. And you can see here the common thesis throughout this interview, and it's something she even spoke about a bit in the interview that myself and Lord Cognito did with her, is learning along the way, putting the pieces together, understanding that first-time director experience. I can imagine, and I know to a certain extent, I'll just throw out there, that it is very tough. Like, there's just a lot of pieces that you have to understand more intimately than your own corner. Like, it's different to go from, like, I'm good at writing, and in her case, like, I'm really good at narrative design. She served as that role for The Outer Worlds, where I think the narrative was fantastic. The characters were fantastic. So to go from that to learning other trades and sort of how all these systems collide and impact one another is tough. Now that she knows that, now that like the gloves are off, I'm curious to see what she can do with all of that knowledge. And so that's kind of what we're getting into. Obsidian isn't saying what's next for the team, but Patel said she wants to keep directing games. The idea of something new is appealing, she said, but it seems more likely she'll be building on Avowed's foundation for expansions or sequels. Quote, now that we've built this wonderful world and also built this team, strength, and memory muscle around the content and the gameplay in this world, I'd love to see us do more with it, end quote, she said. And so, for example, if like you look at the map in Avowed, like you'll see there's a whole quadrant once you explore and beat the whole game. There's like this snow quadrant that's just there, ready to be explored. And to me, this just gives me Outer Worlds vibes. You open up the star map, you see these planets that you can't go to but are there. This is Obsidian proper, where I'm like, we're going to go to that snow zone. No doubt about it. There's going to be some quest that's added into the game that kind of just feeds right into the main story. I'm very keen to see what that's all about. But when it comes to sequels, that's another question I've been getting. Like, should they make an Avowed 2? I do think, again, this is something where I would love to see the gloves off approach. Like, okay, you know what people had an issue with. Like, the main thing I'm seeing a lot of people inspect of this game is A, writing, B, world physics, like interactivity. And that goes into the towns and stuff. If these are things that you can evolve or step away from with your current tool set, make better, adjust for that feedback, and keep the good things about Avowed, you know, its ability to wander, it's awesome magic system, it's kind of interesting class system. I know they recently just did a patch for the actual zone difficulty to make it a lot more manageable. So if they learned how to dial even in that level of difficulty so that, you know, enemies aren't like super spongy, I think those sorts of things will go a long way in a sequel. So I'd like to see what they learn here. I imagine they're likely stacking these sales up to like Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. And famously, as Josh Sawyer had covered in a GDC presentation, very insightful. You should definitely watch it if you have yet to. But he kind of broke down what is, in a sense, this is a strong word, but like his own failure, but not like him. Obviously, he's a storied, legendary creator, but kind of assessing what happened with Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire on the market and kind of compared it to Divinity Original Sin 2 and what that game did that their game didn't address. So this is like the future of the Pillars franchise, it sounds like. I tried to get this answer out of Carrie myself when we were sitting down talking on Defining Duke, and I got the very well PR trained answer of like, you know, we're just we're just trying to focus on launching the game right now. And she said it with a little bit of a smile because I think she knew maybe there is a little bit of a future here, which is what it sounds like. So I'll be interested to see what's going on there. But I just love these sorts of, if you will, truth bombs behind what's going on with the development of the game. Ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the story around the making of Avowed, a game that started off as Skyrim cross Destiny and became what you have here today. So the question for you, of course, hindsight 2020, there are lots of game ideas that sound great on paper. Would you have preferred the Skyrim cross Destiny? Do you like what Avowed ended up being? Do you have optimism for a sequel? How do you feel about all this? Fire away down below. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, I will catch you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.